Does quarantine stink? It doesn't have to. Introducing Lightities, the new luxury candle line by the Lit Society podcast. Each aromatic experience is inspired by literature, from The Great Gatsby to Sula by Toni Morrison. Each candle instantly transports you into the setting that inspired its creation. Discover Lightities today by visiting LOVELITOTES. That's loveliteties.com. Again, loveliteties, LOVELITOTES.com. Or visit Love Lightities on Instagram and Facebook. Lightities, they're not your average fragrances. Growing up in rural Mississippi, one woman watches helplessly as 5 men close to her die over the span of 5 years. Through the pain and confusion, she sees clearly what facilitated the demise of each family member and friend, a system built on the foundations of racism and economical turmoil. She decides to tell their stories as evidence that these living, loving bodies ever existed. Her name is Jesmyn Ward. The book is Men We Reaped, and you're listening to Lit Society.
Let's get lit!
Hi, readers. This is Kari.
And this is Alexis.
And you're listening to Lit Society, a show about books and drama. Alexis, how are you doing this week? Anything going on?
Oh, for me, I took a few days off last week, so I got, I had to go back to work this week, so that was an adjustment,
Back to the office, yeah.
Doing nothing. No, not back to the office. Wake up in the morning and flip up the laptop and start working.
So you're still working from home?
Yeah, and I think I'll be working home for a minimum of at least another 3 months, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, same here. I'm going back to the office, though, starting Monday. Well, I started actually Friday, so,
How's that going for you?
Fine. Reduced hours. Okay. So I have to start a little bit at home and then make my way into the office. But you know what? These days I have nothing to complain about because it's crazy out here.
Mm-hmm.
So I can stay. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
If I can stay corona free and grateful to have a job, I'm not going to complain about anything. I'm alive.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. Times are tough out here.
Each week, readers, we select a theme to discuss based on the book we're reading. And the theme this week is coping with grief. I chose this because a lot of people are watching. A lot of people just know what it's like to lose a loved one to death. That's just what it is. And then on top of that, a lot of people are watching people die on social media. And that can have an effect on your mental. It can feel like someone die, because a lot of people you're watching die might look like people you know. So It can feel like you're watching someone perish right before your eyes. So there's a grief process there. So how to cope with feelings of grief. I am going to speak of my own experience and also bring up some points that I found through research. And I'm hoping you'll chime in too, please.
Okay.
All right. So number 1, cry when and if you want. A lot of people feel like a way to help a person cope is to encourage them to cry, but not everyone grieves in the same way. So if your friend or loved one is not crying over a loss, there's no need really to encourage them to cry. And if you are the one dealing with loss and you don't feel like you're crying enough, don't feel guilty over that. Your body naturally responds to grief, which is an unnatural thing, in a very individual way. Also, if you're crying all the time, don't feel guilty. If the person you're crying about passed away 15 years ago and you just standing in the kitchen crying and you're like, what is this? You're normal. That's completely okay. Completely okay.
100% agree. I'm a crier. So when I grieve, I do cry and it's constant. So, and it feels good to me, even though I'm sad when it's happening. I feel good to have that emotional release.
Yeah, that's important. That is so important in the process of grieving. There is no date when you're done grieving. Like you're not done grieving. If you knew the person for 3 years, then 3 years pass and you should be done. No, it don't work like that. You can grieve at any time. That is your right. Really embrace that part of the process. Second of all, address feelings of guilt. Now, I have had someone close to me take their own life, but there can be a lot of reasons why the surviving friends and family feel guilty over someone's loss. And one thing I found is that it's normal to feel regret over things you wish you had done differently, things you wish you would have said. The fact is, you would have done things differently had you known what would happen, but you did not know. Therefore, guilt is inappropriate. And I got that from a source that I'm happy to share with any readers who are interested. Please send us an email. But I love that statement. Guilt is inappropriate. So while you need to embrace this, these bouts of crying or not crying, whatever coping in whatever way you cope, guilt is inappropriate. That you do not need to embrace, and you need to proactively root that out. That's easier said than done, but it's your responsibility to recognize that any feelings of guilt you have for the last thing you said to that person, what you did or didn't do, you need to remove that from your psyche. Do you have anything to add with that?
I think that's very important because guilt is so common when especially in suicide situations, but in life in general. Maybe your relationship wasn't where you wanted it to be. So,
or you used to be really close and then you were going through a time when you were distant from each other or upset over something, and then they're gone.
Yeah. So that's important and necessary to hear. So thank you for sharing that one. That's a bonus.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Also, communication. So cry when you want or when you don't. Don't cry. Address feelings of guilt and communicate. Let the surviving family members and friends know how you feel when appropriate. Share those feelings. I remember when my father passed, one of your sisters just sent me something saying, I remember when your dad did this and I couldn't stop laughing. And it helps you take yourself out of your own mind, out of your own grief, and just reminisce on the good and bad about this person that you've lost, the reality of them. So such discussions will no doubt relieve you of some of your grief and draw you closer to those surviving this loss along with you. There's an example here. Try to start a conversation with this exercise. List 2 or 3 things that you wish you would have known about your deceased friend or family member, and then ask those surviving, when appropriate, to discuss some of those things with you. Perhaps you have a parent that has died and you wish you had known what they were like in their teens or, in their 20s when they were dating. What were they like? Ask the surviving members, again, when appropriate, and they will no doubt be more than willing to share that with you. It helps them feel like that person is still there, as indeed their memory definitely is.
Yeah, I remember, if I may, when my grandmother died, and I told you I was reading all her letters. And
yes, going through all her stuff.
I was going through all her stuff. I
can't wait to tell her. I'm going to tell her too.
And then
I am. I love snitching.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, she had this friend that had recently wrote her a letter, and I opened it up, and that revealed so much about my grandmother. I felt so close to that. The woman that wrote the letter to her, I was like, look at her. I mean, she is really calling my grandmother out on stuff, and just, she is reading my grandmother.
Telling her the truth, reading her for film. And you was like, that was true. She did used to do that. Oh, this is what I wanted to tell her, but I didn't want to get smacked in the mouth. Thank you.
And then she talked about a love interest my grandmother had, and I was just like, whoa,
girl, let me read that letter. Now, is this a letter? Is this a letter we should post on our website?
Oh, I shredded it because we were show posted, girl.
Along the lines of communication, talk to close friends. That's it sounds repetitive, but maybe you have a close friend who didn't know the person that passed away. Talk to them about how you feel. They want to be there for you. And the person you least expect may be the one who helps you. I definitely have experienced that. It's like, God moved someone to say the exact right thing at the right time. It's not like that. I know for sure that's what it is. And that is a true comfort. And along those lines, if you are someone who believes in God, then talk to him. Pouring out your heart in prayer to the one who can provide comfort is indeed a comfort. Now, there are some more things I got from the Mental Health Association. And those are a few tips I'm going to talk about now. They mentioned to keep a journal. Now, when my father passed, I did write one article for my website, just describing my final days with him with the permission of my mother. And that helped a lot to encapsulate how we were feeling in that moment. Because you start to forget things. Grief also has a way of giving you selective amnesia, and you can forget the bad and good things that happened around that time. Mm-hmm. So writing those things down may help you remember the people who really went out to be there for you, put themselves out to be there for you and your family during your tough time.
Now, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I finally had a chance, and probably maybe 2 months ago, went back and read that. And that was a very beautiful article. I think it was in the mental space to read it, but it didn't make me feel weepy. And you said that in advance.
It did or did not?
It did not. Good. And you said that before, but I wasn't ready. And when I was finally ready, it just was really beautiful.
And you're talking about the article I wrote about the final days with my dad. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I didn't feel overly sad writing it, but I did want to remember everything that happened around that time. Mm-hmm. So, and that's on a blog I used to have, Chicago Wings. I mean, I guess I still have it. That was the last article I wrote, and that was over a year ago. What do you write after that? Travel tips in Miami. I just haven't been motivated.
Oh,
so there's that. Also, in your journal, list some pleasant memories you have of that person. Write down what you wish you would have said while they were alive, and imagine that you have a younger sibling. I love this. Imagine you have a younger sibling who is grieving with you. What would you tell that younger sibling? Those are the words you need to tell yourself, but we don't coddle ourselves like we do children, even if we need it. So in your journal, perhaps write down what you would say to a younger sibling about their feelings of guilt or the grief that they're having coping with the loss.
That's a good one.
This I really like also. Accept that life is for the living. Accept that life is for the living. It doesn't sound fair. When someone passes and life just continues, it's surreal. When you see someone who is in a struggle online and that person has died because of some violence inflicted upon them, it can even subconsciously devalue life in some people's eyes. However, we need to accept that while we are alive, we must take advantage of every day we have. It takes effort to begin life again when we experience a loss, but you cannot dwell on the past consistently. Also, postpone major life changes. Maybe don't get back with your ex, maybe, while you grieve. Maybe don't get married right away.
Right,
maybe don't move. Maybe just wait a second. Maybe.
That's huge. That is huge.
Because you want to comfort. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Be patient. It can take months or even years to absorb major loss and accept your changed life, and seek out help when necessary. If your grief seems like it's too much to bear, seek professional assistance. You can talk to your friends and your family all day long, but sometimes you need a third party whose job it is to listen. And there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, for those who have friends and family that they're helping with grief, here are four quick tips when helping others grieve. Openly grieve with them. Number one, if you feel naturally inclined to do so, don't hold back your tears. Number two, allow them to speak, even wild talk. You might have to speak. You might have to listen, knowing that, they're talking from a hurt place and you need to forget everything you just heard once you leave. Let them just talk. Just let it all out without judgment. Avoid saying things like, number three, everything happens for a reason. I know a lot of people bite into this philosophy. It is seldom helpful. And I don't think it's true, quite frankly. Sometimes things just happen. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then lastly, encourage professional help when necessary. Without judgment, without inflicting any guilt upon them, encourage them to get help when you honestly feel it may benefit them. So that's it. You have anything you want to add?
No, nothing additional. You shared some really great points.
Okay, thank you. Great. Then we'll move on to Men We Reap. Let's take a break though.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay. And we're back. Oh, that was so fast. Woo, what a break. take a break to light Tony's candles, and we back. Sooner than you thought. Here we go.
So, okay.
So, Alexis, you chose this week's book by Jesmyn Ward, Men We Reaped. Can you tell us a little bit about the author and perhaps her motivations for the book?
Yeah. So, given that this is a memoir and the book tells a lot about the author, again, I did not spend a lot of time on it, but I did pull out some points. She is a professor. Now, after all that happened in this book, this woman is an associate professor of creative writing at Tulane University.
Another book that called me lazy and ungrateful. Thanks, Jesmyn.
She published 5 books, including the one that we're considering today. Men We Reaped was published in 2013, and it again is a memoir that discusses the death of 5 men in her life over a period of 5 years. Jesmyn chose to write in honor of her brother, who was killed by a drunk driver in October of 2000. She and her family were victims of Hurricane Katrina. And actually, I couldn't find anything where she actually talked about that, but Wikipedia mentioned it, how I guess their house got swept away and they went to another.
Yeah, she doesn't talk about that in the book.
They went to another neighbor and they kind of refused to offer them assistance. And then she went down to another one who finally let them in. And then over the course of some time, I think they moved a little further out. And eventually she would go past for work every day, the ravaged area that...
where her father once lived?
Where Hurricane Katrina devastated.
Oh, the whole...
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so... Yeah, that's what I have about the author and a little context.
Okay, thank you. A brief synopsis with no spoilers. Can you hook us up? Let us know what's up. Brief synopsis, no spoilers. Take it away.
Men We Reaped tells the story of 5 men whose lives are tragically lost in a world filled with economic disadvantage and racial struggles. Kari, what were your first thoughts?
My first thoughts when reading the inside sleeve of this book was, this is going to be about gang violence. And I don't know if I'm in the headspace to really take that in right now. But I have to, because I have a podcast where I read a book each week.
Alexis is making you read this book.
Alexis is making me read this book. So I'm going to read it, team player. And I was wrong. That's not at all what this is about. Where do I get off? So I think I was projecting my own experiences. And so, right. But there are other ways to die, apparently. So what about you? What were your first thoughts about Men We Reaped?
So let me just say, I was visiting a friend and her husband has a collection of books and he said that I could pick a book. So I was reading through some of his books and her collection of books really intrigued me. So I wanted to read it just from the description of it. I was like, that's got to be really interesting because I know I felt some familiarity with her description in this book. So I wanted to dig into it. Yeah,
men lost and the women left to pick up the pieces. Man, I'm sick of that story. That's a story we are very familiar with. So now that we have that, let me get my coffee, light my lighter teas, and I'm ready. Alexis, please give us a deep dive into Men We Reaped. Let me kick up my feet.
All right. Here we go. This is going to have all kind of spoilers, folks. So here we go.
Spoiler alert. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
All right. So Jesmyn Ward was born April 1st, 1977 at 6 months. Her mom was 6 months pregnant and she delivered early in California and was released from the hospital May 26th. It was expected not only that she wouldn't survive, but if she did so happen to survive, that she would suffer severe developmental problems because of her premature arrival. The family left California when she was 3, and her mom was pregnant with her brother, Joshua. The family returned to DeLisle, Mississippi, a town that both her parents grew up in. Jesmyn's mom would later go on to have 2 younger sisters, that is Narissa, who was born in 1982, and then Shireen, who was born in 1985. Her parents both grew up without fathers in their lives, so they had this commitment to each other that they wanted to raise their children together. They wanted to give them the privilege of a two-parent household and allowed that to let them have opportunity. However, the parents married after the first two children. However, Jesmyn's father was unfaithful to the marriage. And while for many years they fought to keep their marriage together, they just didn't, it just did not work out.
I mean, he was having kids with other women. Some of these women were underage. One at least was a teenage love.
When it started.
Yeah, but it sounds like even later she was young.
Mm-hmm.
So
it continued
the mom
at an early age.
really tried with him repeatedly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they would try to reconcile, but of course it ended in divorce. And when the parents divorced, her father moved to Shrewsbury. It's a Black neighborhood in New Orleans. And the mom would move to Gulfport, Mississippi, which was about 12 miles away from Delisle, which is like the family ground of growth where this
Epicenter.
the epicenter of the family.
Yeah.
But when her mom moved away to Gulfport, she was really looking for some anonymity here. You know, the women in her life, when they were living together in Delisle, she felt like they were rejoicing over the demise of her
she
marriage.
Didn't feel like it. Even her friends would call and be like, "Hey, you looking for your husband? Where your husband at? I know where he is. He at my house." Her friends would be like, "He don't want you. He's gonna stay with me." And she got children with it. This is her husband.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she was like, "I want to get away from all this drama."
She wanted to get away from that, and rightfully so. I know what it means to want to get away and be somewhere and be anonymous. So, I could relate to that. So she did. She did move over to Gulfport, but they would later return to Delisle, and that was because the children didn't really care for it in Gulfport. And she was caring for her children.
Yeah, they weren't doing well.
Yeah. New Orleans was considered the murder capital of the world, I think, at that time. And her father and his brothers had lived in these neighborhoods of New Orleans that were most feared. And while she herself didn't see or know this murder capital from their lives, she did know that it existed. New Orleans is about 65 miles from Delisle, and Delisle is about 66 miles from Pas Christian, which is another community that their family centers on. And then Gulfport, I did mention that it was about 12 miles away. When Jesmyn was growing up, she ended up...
I love how you're making a little map of her life for us. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it just seemed
Look at you, research.
It just seemed like everything was so close together. But to me, in my head, it sounded far apart. So I wanted to hear. It is far apart.
These are all road trips. Don't know. I wouldn't want to take. And I've taken those a million times.
No. An hour away, 10, 20 minutes away. It's not that bad. So when Jesmyn was in the 6th grade, she ended up going to a majority white Episcopalian Mississippi private school. And she went from 6th grade to high school. And this is an opportunity that presented to her. She was being bullied in the school that she was going to.
Racially, yeah. Someone would come in, sit on her desk, and just tell Black jokes.
Yeah.
And throw the N-word at her. Yeah. And even physically threaten her.
Yeah.
A lot of boys did, white boys. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, so this was supposed to be an opportunity to thrive academically and then otherwise. But when she went to this other school, she suffered these racial humiliations as well.
I'm sorry, I reversed it. So she was depressed in her original school, but she suffered a lot of racial assault or verbal assault at her new school, her new private school, with all the opportunities. She was the only Black person, right?
The only Black person, at least until she made it to her final couple years of high school. And that's a hard thing to experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to talk a whole lot about her youth, but I will share that when she was 8, she ended up living with her maternal grandmother in a house that her mom had actually grew up with. There were 13 people living in a 4-bedroom home. The book kind of mentions how when the grandmother was left by the grandfather, she was left with because
he left her for her friend.
For her friend.
Sorry, I just gotta say that.
It's truly like a cycle of men leaving their women for friends, and this community is so small. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Also, cousins dating. Go ahead.
And we'll get into that.
Again, small community.
Small
This is the South.
community. Yes. It was just really eye-opening. And so when the grandfather left, the mom made something out of that house and she added 2 more rooms to the house. And so 13 people were living there. You got the 4 bachelor uncles, 2 aunts that each had a son. The grandmother, then her father, her mother, and then her sisters and brother, along with herself. So later, the younger sister would eventually live there. So they stayed there for a while. And so the family was a tight-knit family. You know, you just, in the community.
They looked out for each other.
Mm-hmm, they truly looked out for each other. This is what she was accustomed to. This is what drew her in and had her loving the community in which she grew up, this community, this close-knit community that she was a part of. And the family, of course, were affected by the policies of whatever president was in time.
Reaganomics. Yeah, for sure.
And so that created this shaky and depressed economic society, this economic economy in the South, and that truly affected their family. So we learned that Jesmyn loved to read, and she learned that early on. She got an appreciation for reading early on. She said it helped her escape. She talked about some of the books that she read and this time when they went out into this open field and they wanted to, they were told to get out of the house. You know, go outside and play. You know, one of those things.
Oh, man, that's Southern upbringing.
Uh-huh.
Get your kids out when the sun come up, and they better be in when the sun go down. Oh, that's some fun times.
Yeah, I don't know them, but I believe them to be true.
Oh, yes. I remember being in the South with cousins just playing. Yeah. Feeling free. Ooh.
And so that is what I felt and I could feel the fun and the joy of being outside and playing with your cousins and your brothers and sisters and creating this fantasy world for yourself. And that is what they did in the area that they named, what was it? Kidsland? Kidsland.
Was it Kidsland? Yeah, something like that.
I think she came up with something after, but I don't remember what it was. But it was Kidsland. I guess one of the younger kids could only say Kidsland, but it was Kidsland. She said, I wanted something more like Bridget Terabithia.
Yeah, because she's a little nerd.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, so I thought that was fun. She enjoyed doing things like watching Saturday morning cartoons. It seemed like they had the run of the house on Saturday mornings and were able to hold the TV's attention and watch all the Saturday morning cartoons. She said that Popeye was their favorite show because it was broadcast from a studio in New Orleans, and Popeye's fast food chain would invite the white children to the studio to sit on bleachers and eat fried chicken and biscuits.
I'm actually glad they didn't invite the black children for that. But
that was
issue.
A thing.
Okay, go ahead.
That was indeed a thing. That's what they did. She talks about being out and about and, having a couple dollars to go to the store and getting all the candy. And her favorite candy was the candy cigarettes. And I got to get out there with the sis because I love candy cigarettes. Shout out to my brother-in-law.
Remember candy cigarettes. Can you imagine? Candy cigarettes. What an evil concept.
Why are you giving children candy cigarettes?
And you blow them and smoke comes out. Powder.
Comes out. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, but she enjoyed candy cigarettes. And one time she got caught. What she had found. One of the uncles had flicked a cigarette. She raced to pick it up, and then she went to go, we're going to smoke this cigarette. So they took the little kids.
She gathered all the kids and was like, hey, y'all, we about to smoke this cigarette. It's about to be lit.
Literally. And then, mind you, like the kids were all younger than her. She was like the oldest, and she was taking the kids to go smoke because she wanted the freedom that the uncle had with smoking cigarettes.
Men were always free to do whatever they want. Leave their families or take their family savings and buy motorcycles. They could do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And she wanted that freedom.
She wanted that freedom. But she did get caught. Let's see.
No children smoked this cigarette.
Right.
Well,
she tried, but
her.
The aunt caught him. She had heard them talking about, I want to smoke this cigarette.
Get your butt in here. Jesmyn, get your butt in here. I can already hear it.
That's how that went, girl. You know that's how that went.
Who said we gonna smoke cigarettes? Nobody, ma'am. What? I did, ma'am. Ooh, it's giving me chills. I feel like I'm back in the South.
Because that's how that went down. You know the story.
the beatings with the sticks. And it's something about the sticks down there. They're so strong.
Oh, boy, I never heard of such a thing.
Keep going. I'm having flashbacks.
Oh, my goodness. She said she experienced some violence in her life, her and her brother. And she said she experienced some violence in her life, her and her brother. There was a time when her younger brother, well, she only had the one brother. Her brother was riding on a kind of, I don't think it was a motorcycle, but maybe a moped with the uncle. And then he hit something. And the brother, he had that, the way your tongue connects to the bottom of your mouth.
Yeah.
That was ripped and was bleeding. But the parents never took him to the hospital, but it healed up fine. And she said she's not sure what that had to do, why they didn't take him to the hospital, but they did not. And then she talks about the time when she was bit by a dog. She said that the family kind of had as pets dogs, some pit bulls, mostly mixed breeds. And there was a time when one of the newer dogs was
mating.
He was trying to mate, and she got in the way of that.
I think the female attacked her.
No,
like seeing her as a threat.
No, it was the
the male attacked her, seeing her as a threat.
Okay. The male attacked her, seeing her as a threat, and he bit her. I mean, she had dog marks. Of course, he was
trying to go for the neck.
Yeah, they were very concerned. Even the father, they understood that these dogs go for the neck. They knew she could essentially have died from that. So that's a lot of her childhood. But we're going to move on and talk about the first friend.
Can I just go back for 1 second?
Absolutely.
She suffered from low self-esteem, and there was a time when she let some boys in the house because she thought they were there for her brother.
Oh, yeah.
But one of them was trying to force himself on her. And in her mind, because she was trying to fight him off, but he was too strong. And in her mind, she was thinking, I deserve this. I deserve this. And her 3-year-old sister stomped on his groin and kicked him out the house.
Her 3-year-old brother. Sister.
Brother?
Mm-hmm. Sister. You're right.
3 years old. She jumped on the couch, stomped his groin, and said, "Get off my sister." And that woke Jesmyn up and galvanized her to push him off and kick him out the house. And when they closed the door, the 3-year-old was like, "Hey, you better not come back." And Jesmyn was like, wow, this 3-year-old got more confidence than I do.
Right.
I just love that. I love family sticking up for family. Even the 3-year-old was like, "It ain't gonna happen. I don't know what you trying to do," because she don't know what's going on. And she like, "My sister don't like it, so I'm gonna fight."
Yeah.
I love it. "I like you," Thomas said. I was mute. He pressed against me, sandwiching me between him and the cushions. I half stood, and he grabbed my arm and yanked me back down to the sofa. "You don't like me?" he said. I shook my head. His hand slid up my arm to my shoulder, my neck. I jerked away from him, and he moved with me. I was helpless. "Stop," I said. "What? I'm not doing anything." "Stop touching me," I said. I deserve this, I thought. "Come on, girl," he said, leaning into me again, leading with his mouth. He grabbed my arm. This is my fault, I thought. Shireen and Narissa were quiet. "Stop it." I couldn't breathe. He was too big. Just sit there, and if you take it long enough, it'll be over, I thought. Shireen jumped up from her squat on the floor and ran toward the sofa. She leapt into Thomas' lap, feet first, and began jumping on him, stomping his crotch. "Leave my sister alone! Leave my sister alone!" she yelled. "Get off me," he said, trying to push her away, sliding over enough that I was able to get up and away from him. I stood. "Leave her alone," Shireen said, kicking. Narissa was crying. I scooped Shireen up under my armpits and swung her to my waist. She had given me my voice back. "Get out," I said. "What?" "Get out," I said, "or I'm going to call my mama." He jumped up from the sofa. I ran to the side door, Shireen still on my hip, and swung the door open wide, letting in the heat of the day. "Out." It didn't matter if my mother was home or not. Thomas caught me out when I was hanging clothes by myself or sweeping the carport. He wouldn't come into the yard, but he would roam the edge of the fence, the woods at the back of the house, scream, "I know you hear me talking to you. You hear me talking to you." And then, "I see you." When he said this, I thought he meant that he saw all the misery in me, saw that I deserved to be treated this way by a boy. Any boy, all boys, everyone. And I believed him.
that it really does go to the lack of confidence and self-esteem issues that she faced as she was growing up. So part 2, Roger Eric Daniels III, 23, died June 3rd, 2004. When Roger died, 4 other men close to her had already died. She was returning home from graduate school that summer, 2004, and her cousin Alden, who had lived with the family while she was growing up, helped her to drive home. So he flew out to Michigan where she was in school, and then they drove back home together. Her only feeling that summer was that she hoped no one dies. I could truly relate to that because I remember experiencing and saying something very similar when I was growing up. Jesmyn always went home for the school breaks, summer, winter, spring. She was always returning home. She missed home so badly. So when she went home, she stayed with her mother. Jesmyn was the first in the family to be able to get away to college. Her younger sister, Shireen, was still at home. She would finish high school shortly after Jesmyn returned home that summer. Her sister, Narissa's son, Deshaun, was being raised by her mother as well. Narissa had Deshaun when she was 13 years old, and when she was 13 years old. When Jesmyn returned home, she immediately hung out with Raj, that's Roger, a childhood friend of the family. And one time she was visiting home, and this would have been the first Mardi Gras parade after her brother's death. And Raj was there to kind of soothe her brother's absence. He was short and lean, and he smiled a lot. And Roger's father had died from a heart attack at 28. So he was raised with his 2 older sisters and some other kids. I didn't get the sense that he was raised by his mother. Did you?
I think he was raised by the family collectively. That's what I got from it.
Okay. All right. They mentioned a Mrs. P, but I don't remember ever hearing who she was. Roger dated Jesmyn's sister, Narissa, they say, for about a week, and when they were in middle school, but he broke up with her because she was too boyish.
They be going out on dates and she put on her J's and like her baggy pants. Like, what? She was basically left eye.
Yeah.
Also, can I just say,
go ahead.
Jesmyn is fine. So I imagine all her family fine too.
All very beautiful people.
And she spoke about how her sister was very beautiful, but he broke up with her because she dressed like a tomboy.
Yeah, yeah. So Jesmyn described her sister as a beauty, having curves as early as 9 years old. And her parents would say things like, if we got to worry about any child making us grandchildren, parents early, Narissa would be the one. I hope she didn't hear that, but
That's true. Yeah.
That's it. So Raj was an artist, so he liked to draw, but he dropped out of school in the 10th grade, which wasn't uncommon for the young Black men. Sometimes they were passively forced out by school authorities, branded as misfits, and accused of serious offenses like selling drugs or harassing other students. Sometimes they were pushed to the back of the classroom and ignored. And Raj was in one of these classrooms where he was truly ignored. When he left school, he ended up moving to LA in 2000 to live with his relatives, and he loved it there. He worked in an auto body shop, and he made more money than he would have been able to make while living in Mississippi. But Raj ended up returning to Delau in 2002. Jesmyn mentions how while there are people that stayed away, there are a significant number of people that came back home when they left. When they hung out that summer of 2004, they did the things that they always did. They hung out at that club, Illusions. They would laugh, they drank, they smoked. That is how they coped then with life. The summer, Raj talked about returning to California, but Raj snorted cocaine. He actually died of a heart attack after snorting cocaine and taking pain meds. Friends would stop by his house, and they were knocking on the door looking for him, assuming that maybe he was just passed out. But sadly, he had died. He laid at home dead for 2 days before he was found by his sister, Rhea. Part 3. Desmond Cook, 31, died February 26, 2004. Now, Jesmyn met Desmond through her sister, Narissa, and she met him, not in her youth, but in her older life. And Jesmyn was a lot older than the other kids. Nerissa was the first of their family to move out on her own, but she didn't have a choice. She was kicked out after her mother and Nerissa disagreed on how to mother Nerissa's son, Deshaun. One time in their youth, Joshua told Nerissa she was loved least because she was the middle child. And that kind of colored Nerissa's sense of self and made her act out and want to be special to someone. So it's a whole self-esteem thing.
I'm thinking that was probably backed up by the action. That was probably partially true.
That her mom didn't love her? Oh, that she was loved less.
He didn't say that they didn't love her. He said
loved less.
I'm the boy. Yeah, like what special place do you have in this family? You are loved the least, which is something that family might throw at you, especially kids sometimes. But she really took it to heart.
Yeah, and that does happen when it gets taken to heart. That'd be serious. People shouldn't say those things.
Hey. That's family. What you gonna do? I might have told some people, don't nobody even like, I think you adopted. You don't even look like us. People say that all the time.
Ooh, child. And we internalize those things. Well, anyway,
sometimes.
Demise was friends with Nerissa's longtime boyfriend, Rob. By the time she'd met Demise, they had already lost 3 friends by then, and they couldn't really reconcile their youth with the fact that they were all dying. So they drank, they smoked, they did other things. Again, they're coping. That's the way they knew how to cope. Demise grew up in Delisle, but he was unusual because he was an only child, and he grew up with 2 parents who had working class jobs. He grew up having things that other children wanted, like a swimming pool, a basketball hoop. So his place was the place where children wanted to hang out. Demise graduated from high school. He went on to the military, but he decided the military wasn't for him. Demise is described as a hustler in the traditional sense, and that he would do anything he needed to care for his family. He had a child and a girlfriend that he lived with at a home that his grandmother gave him. He worked as a carpenter and learned that trade as he went. He worked at a clothing factory, but the job that he had when he died was at the pharmaceutical company that his mom worked for. They often hung out at her sister Nerissa's house, and Jesmyn got to know Demise over like a crawfish boil. She said one time he asked, "What you doing in New York?" And she told him she was trying to become a writer. Her sister said she'd write about real life and stuff.
Yeah, they be like smoking and drinking and stuff. Yeah, it's about the hood. It's some real stuff.
Right, exactly. So Demise was like,
"Oh, that's dope.
Yeah, you should write about my life."
Jesmyn sat at the table with Nerissa and me, and Shireen passed us drinks, asked me questions about what I did. "So what you doing up there?" "I'm trying to be a writer." "What you want to write?" "Books about home, about the hood." "She writing about real stuff," Shireen said. "What do you mean?" Jesmyn asked. "They be selling drugs in the book," Shireen said. "For real?" Jesmyn asked. Took a swig of his beer. "Yeah," I said, laughed, drank a third of my bottle. "I told you, she be writing about the hood," Shireen said. "You should write about my life," Jesmyn said. "I should, huh?" I laughed again. I heard this often at home. Most of the men in my life thought their stories, whether they were drug dealers or straight-laced, were worthy of being written about. Then I laughed it off. Now, as I write these stories, I see the truth in their claims. "It'd be a bestseller," Jesmyn said. "I don't write real-life stuff," I said. It was my stock response for that suggestion, but even as I said it, I experienced a sort of dissonance. I knew the boys in my first novel, which I was writing at the time, weren't as raw as they could be, weren't real. I knew they were failing as characters because I wasn't pushing them to assume the reality that my real-life boys, Jesmyn among them, experienced every day. I loved them too much. As an author, I was a benevolent God. I protected them from death, from drug addiction, from needlessly harsh sentences in jail for doing stupid juvenile things like stealing 4-wheel ATVs. All of the young Black men in my life and my community had been prey to these things in real life, and yet in the lives I imagined for them, I avoided the truth. I couldn't figure out how to love my characters less, how to look squarely at what was happening to the young Black people I knew in the South, and to write honestly about that. How to be an Old Testament God to avoid all of this. I drank.
Jesmyn had been the witness to the aftermath of a shooting and had agreed to testify against the alleged shooter. The shooting happened in Delisle during a holiday. Jesmyn had also agreed to testify against a drug dealer who wasn't from Delisle, but had been operating in the neighborhood. His conscience had moved him to testify in the first case with the shooting, but in the second case, it was self-preservation. He was riding in the car with the drug dealer when he was stopped by the cops. So the idea that he needed to testify against somebody, that kind of weighed on him, maybe made him a little edgy. So if there was loud music being played outside of his home, he wanted people to keep that down because he didn't want to draw attention to himself. So on February 26, 2004, Jesmyn was working third shift, and he called his friend Rob, that is Narissa's boyfriend, and asked him to run to the 24-hour pharmacy with him to get diapers for his daughter. And instead of going straight to Rob's house after he left work, he went home. Rob waited, but then fell asleep because Jesmyn never showed. His girlfriend would wake in the middle of the night because he wasn't in bed, and she found him dead on the front lawn. Jesmyn had been shot, again leaving another emotional upheaval. Part 4. Charles Joseph Martin, 20, died January 5th, 2004. CJ, he was called, was one of Jesmyn's many cousins. Jesmyn went away to college when CJ was 12. The neighborhood children played at a park instead of the family homes because it attracted less police. CJ was 14 when he started dating Shireen. This is Jesmyn's sister. Yes, that is his cousin.
Kissing cousins. And they didn't care. It made them feel like star-crossed lovers. But for real, everyone was just going, oh, y'all nasty.
Literally. And they did not care. And so while many people hated that they were dating, it wasn't uncommon. Cousins dated, they married, they had children in Delisle and Pastor Christian all the time. They had for generations. This was normal.
They were basically like, Jane Austen characters, but in post-antebellum South.
Right. And this happened especially in small towns and communities confined by race and class. So it would seem inevitable that these things would happen. But as Kari mentioned, they didn't care. The couple was inseparable. His mother was a single parent to him and his sister. His mother never married. He lived with his mom, but was never home because his room ceiling was caving in and there was boxes on his bed that filled with things that weren't his. And so maybe this left in him a feeling of being a burden. So he would go to his father's house. But at his father's house, his father was living with his girlfriend and her daughters. And while his father did try to integrate him into that new family, I don't think CJ really kind of
took to
integrated. Yeah, he never officially integrated. So he hung out or stayed at other cousins' homes and just, slept there mostly. He never really wanted to go home. When CJ was 17, he dropped out of high school. Just like Raj, he likely felt ignored and unremarkable because he wasn't an academic standout. And while he did like sports, he didn't play organized sports. So one day while CJ, Shireen, and another cousin were together, they found a pit bull and they decided, CJ and Shireen, that they would keep that pit bull as a baby for themselves.
This is low-key adorable. Okay.
Yeah. Although Shireen and Jesmyn were 8 years apart, Jesmyn says that Shireen was her best friend. So they did a lot of things together. CJ often felt like he wasn't going to be around forever. And of course, when he would say things like this, they would tell him to stop saying that. He never spoke about what he dreamed of doing, what he would do when he would grow up. It's just, he just felt so disconnected. He didn't aspire or dream for those things because he felt like he would not be on earth long. One time, when CJ was walking along the tracks with his friends or cousins and passed Christian, and a train was coming, CJ seemed to ignore the train coming and kept walking along the tracks. While his friends moved out of the way, CJ waited until the train was at his back and the conductor was panicking. Years later, Nerissa told me a story she heard from one of CJ's friends and past Christian. They were walking along the train tracks, Nerissa said, because it was the fastest way to get around town. CJ would have been sure-footed, stepped easily over the hunks of granite that shifted while he skimmed from wooden cross tie to wooden cross tie. Over years, these had been burned black by the Mississippi sun and the heat of the trains. On either side of the tracks, ditches ran deep with water. Cattails grew tall. CJ would have heard it first, the way the train whistled in the distance behind him. His friend lopped on for a few steps and then crossed over the steel rails before wondering why CJ kept walking. A small smile on his face, but even that was like a slide of rocks down a hill. All hard. Or perhaps CJ glared at the ground when he walked. Either way, he ignored the blasting train advancing toward him. He ignored his friend, who flinched at the train's blast. I ain't, CJ told people. I ain't long for this world. He waited until he felt the train cleave the air at his back, until the horn made his eardrums pulse, until he was sure the conductor was panicking. And then he called on his lean golden body to do what it would. And he jumped from the tracks, out of the way, alive another day. On January 4th, 2004, as CJ and Shireen were in Jesmyn's car in the driveway, he didn't want to leave. He always wanted to stay with Shireen, and this was another day. He just wanted to stay with Shireen and talk. That's all he wanted to do. But Shireen said she hated the cold, so Shireen went inside and CJ left. The phone rang at 2 a.m. in the morning, and it was CJ's mother. Jesmyn answered the phone. CJ had been in an accident and didn't make it. CJ's mother cried and hung up. Jesmyn didn't feel like she could tell Shireen herself, so she called her cousin Hilton, and he came and told Shireen that CJ was with his cousin and they hit a train. It was a foggy night. There was no reflective gate at the railroad
because
crossing.
they're in a poor neighborhood, so no one bothered to keep up the warning signs around the train. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if the warning signs were up, they said the fog was so thick that night that it was it just
light. They could
seemed
have
like
seen
a
a
lost
light.
cause. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. CJ was in the passenger seat, and when the car swerved, it hit the right side of the when the car swerved and hit the train, it hit the right side of the car, was crushed on impact. CJ was stuck inside the car caught fire, and he burned while his cousin stood helplessly hollering for help. Part 5. Ronald Wayne Lozana, 19, died December 16th, 2002. Jesmyn, by this time, is 15 years old. She attended elementary school with Ronald's oldest sister. People thought they were related. While in high school at a private school, Jesmyn was a counselor at a day camp for underprivileged children. Most of the children in Delisle and past Christian were eligible to go, but only 3 attended that summer. That's Antonio, her cousin Rajia, and Ronald, who was 9. Jesmyn remembered thinking that he was going to get all the girls because he was such a cutie, and she felt like he was a charmer. Jesmyn wanted to volunteer at the 2-week camp because she wanted to get out of the house, and Joshua was old enough to watch the younger sisters. Jesmyn was a dance teacher at the camp, and the other teacher choreographed dances to the Humpty Dance and I Wish I Was a Bit Taller, which they would perform for the other students at the end of the week. At the end of the day, on that first day, Ronald told her she couldn't dance, and he ended up convincing her to add a dance to the routine. They called it the pop. I was thinking pop locking.
No, I remember when boys used to pop like girls. I do remember. I remember that. So that's what I assumed it was. I don't think they were pop locking. Okay. I think they was like popping. Because she was like, you can't pop. And he was like, yes.
Right. Yes, he did. Right.
And he was looking back at it. That's the 90s.
Yeah. So Ronald was a charmer, as I mentioned. And so one day Jesmyn told Ronald that he was cute. And Ronald said, one day I'm going to marry you. Jesmyn was like, really? He was like, yup. You promise? Yup. So Ronald was good friends with Shireen. And so when Jesmyn would come home from school He would be at her mother's house, hanging out with Shireen in her room. He always seemed to be smiling, but she didn't know that he had this dark side or that he wasn't happy. He seemed like he was. Ronald lived with his mother. They would argue. Then he would live with his sister. Then they would argue, and then he'd be homeless for a time until his older cousin, Selena, found him squatting in an abandoned house. And she told him, kinfolk don't live on the street. Ronald moved in with her. Ronald snorted cocaine and hustled for money. This is why he fought with his family. They loved him dearly. He loved them too. It made him unhappy to be estranged from his family. They just wanted him to start working and stop doing drugs, but he couldn't stop. He wanted to go to rehab, again, because he hated that he was estranged from his family. He felt he couldn't please any other woman in his life, including his girlfriend. He told his cousin one time that he was going to pull a trigger once, but the phone rang and it was his sister, so he didn't do it that day. His cousin asked why. He said, I got all these problems and my girlfriend been doing shady stuff. He thought she was cheating on him. Ronald said he loved this woman to death. The night before Ronald died, one of his cousins said that he told him he was going to the military. He said the military presented hope for him. Selena said her son's birthday was the day before. She'd thrown a party and she got a call from Ronald every other hour saying that he was coming. He was on his way. He didn't forget. But at the end of the day, Selena received a call from one of his friends who said she saw him at the gas station and he didn't really look like himself. So when she turned around to try to connect with him, he actually disappeared. December 16th, Ronald was at his sister's apartment alone talking on the phone to his girlfriend. He said, tell me you love me. And she said no.
Because she was sick of him whining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He said, I'm going to kill myself. She said, you're not. Stop playing. And she dismissed his threats. When he hung up, he shot himself in the head. Jesmyn learned about Ronald's death while at work in New York City, and Shireen called to tell her, and she came home for the burial. Part 6. Joshua Adam Dedo, 20, died October 2nd, 2000. This is where the past and the future meet. This is after the pit bull attack, after my father left, and after my mother's heart broke. This is after the bullies in the hallway, after the nigger jokes, after my brother told me what he'd done as we stood out on the street. This is after my father had 6 more children with 4 different women, which meant he had 10 children total. This is after my mother stopped working for one white family who lived in a mansion on the beach and began working for another white family who lived in a large house on the bayou. This is after I'd earned 2 degrees, a crippling case of homesickness, and a lukewarm boyfriend at Stanford. This is before Ronald, before CJ, this is before Demond, before Raj. This is where my 2 stories come together. This is the summer of the year 2000. This is the last summer that I will spend with my brother. This is the heart. This is every day. This is. When Jesmyn finished her master's coursework at Stanford in April 2000, she packed up her things and moved home, back to Mississippi. She wanted to live in Mississippi or somewhere near. She was tired of being away and being perpetually lonely. She was homesick and wanted to be near her family. Going away from college didn't make her more confident or self-assured as she had expected. Instead, it made her confused, timid, and unsure of herself, and she yearned for the familiar. Her then boyfriend had decided to take a job in New York City after graduation, and she felt like it was
presumptuous to go with him, even though they had been dating for 5 years.
Yes. So she was picked up from the airport by her mom and her brother Joshua in a cream-colored Caprice that her mom had purchased for herself and then later given to Joshua as his first car. While Jesmyn desperately wanted to return home, she hadn't considered that her bachelor's in English and her master's in communication would be virtually worthless in this coastal economy where jobs in casinos, factories, and hospitals and the military base were the thing to do. So she pushed her job search out further. She looked in Alabama. She looked in Louisiana. Then she even looked in Georgia. Then she faced the challenges of looking for work out of state, not being a resident in the state that you're applying for a job in. The whole time she was running up the long distance phone bill at home. So her mom canceled the long distance. She's like, you better forget that, girl. And so she ended up going to the gas station to buy some phone cards. In June, Narissa and Shireen told Jesmyn that mom had hinted that she might kick her and Joshua out if they didn't find jobs. Weeks later, Joshua found a job at the Grand Casino in Gulfport as a parking attendant. He liked what he was doing. He got to drive nice cars all evening and get paid for it, so he was satisfied. While Joshua was between jobs, and before he landed his job at the casino, he would sell crack. When Jesmyn found out, she was worried about her brother, of course. She questioned him on it, and he said, I don't like doing it. I mean, do you think I like doing it? He said he wasn't like the rest of the people out there, because when he got a job, he actually worked, and that was kind of like his side gig in between. But Jesmyn was worried about him. He had dropped out of school in the 9th grade, participated in the job corps for a couple of months, but then he quit. He enrolled in a GED program and thought about joining the military, but changed his mind after watching Full Metal Jacket and decided he didn't want to die like that. A former college roommate had told Jesmyn about a possible job at Random House, a publisher in New York, and Jesmyn asked her to send along her resume and a cover letter. If she was offered this job, she would definitely move. Jesmyn's last memory of her brother was when he saw her suitcase on the floor in her room. He asked where she was going, and she told him to interview for a job, and he said to stay, and she said yes. Her brother didn't want her to leave again. Again, they were a very close family, but Jesmyn felt like she had no choice. She had graduated in March, and it was now the end of September, and she still hadn't found a job.
And for real,
and she was continuing to rack up
Random
debt.
House. Yeah, go get that job.
Oh, right. Yeah. I'm like, did I say something different? Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's right. And then, student loans kick in after 6 months. The
from
clock.
Stanford? Oh, no. Oh, no.
The clock was ticking. So she had things to do. Jesmyn had arranged to be in New York from October 1st through the 4th for interviews. And she wanted to be home for Shireen's 15th birthday on the 5th. So after one interview, she headed back to the boyfriend's brown house that she was staying with. And he was a banker and he worked 18 hours, but
he was
at the house. Also that. But he was at the door when she arrived. So she was surprised to see him home. And he told her that she needed to call her dad. She called her dad and was told that Joshua was in an accident last night and didn't make it. Of course, this devastated her. It turns out Joshua had gone to work that afternoon on October 6th. And although he wasn't scheduled, he was picking up some extra hours. Narissa and Shireen saw him coming through the employee parking garage. So they kind of waited at the main entrance, the main employee entrance, hoping they could catch him before he went into work. But they didn't see him. They waited for like 15 minutes and left, assuming that he went through another entrance. That night on October 2nd, after he clocked out, instead of taking the highway and then getting off on a Delisle exit to go home, he decided to take, I would say, a more scenic route. And so he gets off on the median by these $1 million homes, and a drunk driver, a white man in his 40s, speeds up on Joshua from behind in a white car that he had borrowed and hit Joshua's car at 80 miles an hour. Joshua pressed his brake by instinct, but the momentum was too much and the car didn't stop. He skidded sideways onto the front yard of one of those mansions, and his car hit a fire hydrant, which came up through the floor of the car, peeled back the metal, and smashed into his chest, and then hit an oak tree. The car then hit an oak tree and then landed upside down on one of the lawns. Joshua died. The driver of the car, his car flew across 2 lanes of highway and landed on the beach. So the night they found Joshua, his accident was a mystery. So they assumed that he just lost control of the car. But the next day, someone called Pass Christian Police Department and reported that there was a car on the beach. The driver had staggered home after he hit Joshua, but by the time the police tracked the car of the owner's house, it was the next day, and the driver was no longer drunk. He was arrested and convicted for leaving the scene of an accident and sentenced to 5 years in jail order to pay restitution. He only served 3 years and 2 months and never paid her mom a thing. Narissa, I believe, went to school with the nephew, and the nephew attempted to apologize for the uncle, saying he messed up all the time. Yeah.
That don't bring her brother back. And her brother's
Not at all.
life in the eyes of the justice system was worth 3 years.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So part 7, the end. So Jesmyn kind of concludes her book with some statistics that I wanted to note here. And unfortunately, I didn't get the most current, but these were the statistics at the time. 38% of Mississippi population is Black. It is one of the 6 states that African Americans constitute at least a quarter of the population. In 2009, the poverty rate was the greatest in the South and greatest in Mississippi, where 23.1% of the people live below the poverty line. In the 2001 census, Mississippi was listed as the poorest state in the country. The median income was $34,000, and about 35% of Black Mississippians live below the poverty level, compared with 11% of whites. About 1 in every 12 Black Mississippi men in their 20s is an inmate in the Mississippi prison system. Although I didn't share all the details of these stories, the book weaves in how family history, racism, poverty, and a lack of economic power have affected them all. The death of her brother left her consumed with grief and led her on a path of drinking, smoking, and anguish as her only coping mechanism. Jesmyn had to look back to her mother and her grandmother's legacy as a lesson of resilience, courage, and strength to get through her grief. Now she would pass these lessons on to her daughter. And that's it. Let's take a quick break.
Okay, let's do it.
And we're back.
Wow.
All right.
Yep.
That's our book. What's your final verdict, and would you recommend this book?
My final verdict is that this is a book that deals with a very heavy, sombering, sad topic, but she does it in such a poetic, matter-of-fact, human way that I was surprised by the end of the book. I wasn't overcome with grief myself. I really compared these stories to the men I know in my life and the women who seem to be left picking up the pieces and what that means for future generations. So it made me reflect a lot about my own experiences. I really appreciated Jesmyn bringing these lives to the pages of her book so that they're not forgotten. Even in the smallest, in the shortest life, there's a lot of meaning there. So I love this book and I would definitely recommend it. I loved it. I think it was a great pick. Thank you so much. What about you? Did you enjoy the book and would you recommend it?
So this book left me with so many feelings. It was I was reminded of my teenage years with some joy, with some sadness. I was reminded of my brothers, and I'm just not sure I want to have feelings and memories like these. So that was kind of hard. But I loved how she weaved the statistics in there and stories of what was going on at that time. And so for that, it keeps my head level because there's some factual aspects to this. I mean, it is fact, but there were some
relatable aspects. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, okay. I do. That help it. That helped me digest it. So I did enjoy the book, and I would recommend it with the note that there is some harsh language in here.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Well, that's it. That is episode 20-something of the Lit Society podcast. Thank you, readers, for tuning in again. Please join us next week where we're covering what book?
Yeah, I don't know the answer.
It's The Silent Patient. Well, that's what it is now. Okay. Please continue to visit our website for updated reading schedule. Depending on the times, sometimes we change the book if things get too heavy. We've tried to insert some humor. But for right now, it's The Silent Patient, which is a thriller. We'll see how that goes. I don't know anything about this book. It's my recommendation. I take full responsibility. So again, thank you for listening to Lit Society. We'll see you next Thursday. Lit Society is brought to you by Alexis Honoria and Kari Herrera. Support the cause by leaving a 5-star review for our show on Apple Podcasts, along with a comment about why you absolutely love us. We love y'all too. If you've enjoyed what you've just heard, tell a friend about Lit Society. Visit litsocietypod.com for show notes, this month's book list, and to sign up for our amazing email newsletter. And until next time, read something. Okay, thank you. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.